So as folks are starting to join here, we will go ahead and get this kicked off. Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining our 10th and final boot camp of the Run on Less Electric Depot series. My name is Rachel Ellenberger, and I'm the Industry Engagement Manager for the North American Council for Freight Efficiency. Next slide, please. So NACFE and RMI have hosted this series throughout the summer to discuss all things fleet depot electrification, and this is our final session together. Next slide. And we have our Executive Director, Mike Roth, on the line with us here today to our last update from the run. Mike.
Yeah, hi Rachel, and hello everybody. What are we going to do in 2 weeks without a boot camp session at this time of day? It's been, I can't believe it's already, everybody says time flies, but 10 sessions, 20 weeks, that's about 5 months of these boot camps, and it's been really exciting. And I'm really pleased that we included this again in the Run on Less effort, because it's just such a great way to lead up to the actual run that'll take place starting next Monday. So thanks everybody who's joined us in these boot camp sessions, those speakers like these 4 folks that have joined us with their expertise, and then even want to thank Rachel and the moderators from NACFE, John, Rob, Rick, and Ari. I mean, everybody's really put forth, I think, a great boot camp session. Now the boot camp doesn't end. I mean, it ends live, right? But the presentations are all there, the recordings are all there, the quizzes are there, and they'll stay. We actually see people. We saw some people actually view the 2021 boot camp sessions recently, so they'll remain. But now we're going to turn after this boot camp session to really the run itself. So. Here we are on September 5th on Tuesday. Next Monday, or this coming Monday, the 11th, the run actually starts. So for 3 weeks, we will have a lot of action on runonless.com. We'll have data coming from the depots themselves, as well as from a number of trucks. We're still working on making sure all the truck data is coming through our dashboard, but something like around 21 trucks we'll actually be streaming data from those trucks around state of charge over the day, charging activity, all kinds of data will be coming to us starting Monday, September 11th. We're using that data and other data to then predict the power requirements of each of the sites, both what we're seeing here during the month of September, but also if the sites were all at 100% electrification. So that's the data that you'll start to see. So that's where sort of the right brainers can geek out on a lot of data with the run here over the next month. But we'll also continue with video storytelling throughout the month, as well as some blogs that we'll be producing. So keep your eyes on runonless.com, and there'll be a lot going on and a lot to learn, and we're really excited about it. After the run's over September 30th, we'll start to share our findings and some initial thoughts about what we've learned. And then we'll get into some deep analysis of the data, of the site and visits we made and so forth, to then publish reports in 2024 based on what we learned here with Run on Less Electric Depot. So thanks for being involved in the boot camp. Stay with us through the run and into 2024. There's a ton to be learned from all of the participating fleets and everyone that's involved. So thanks, Rachel. We're going to go live on Monday, if you will, with the real event we call Run on Less Electric Depot. Thanks.
I'm muted there. Thank you so much, Mike. And if we could go to the next slide, please. So as always, I have a quick few bits of housekeeping before we get started. So first, I would like to thank today's session sponsor, Prologis. Thank you to Prologis for your sponsorship to help make this series possible. Next slide. And a reminder that the quiz will be available immediately online following this session. This is going to be your opportunity to test your knowledge from the session. And upon completion of this session's quiz, you will finally receive your Depot Expert badge. So to access the quiz, make sure that you go to the landing page for this session on runonless.com. You will see the button to take the quiz there. And also a reminder that the materials and quizzes from all of our sessions, like Mike said, including our 2021 sessions, are still available online. So if you didn't get the chance to take the quizzes, you didn't get a chance to watch the videos or review the materials, be sure to go back to runonless.com. All of the information is going to be there. Next slide, please. And a reminder that the session is being recorded, will be available online later this week. If you didn't get a chance to submit a question on the registration form and would like to do so, please use the Q&A controls in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. During this session, I will be elevating the questions to our speakers, and for those that we don't get to or won't be covering in this session, we are still collecting them to build out future content. So if there's something that you're curious about, be sure to send it in. And if you run into any technical issues, please reach out to Stefan Babcock at GNA, who will help you troubleshoot. His email is there. If any of our panelists run into any technical issues, they can use the chat function on the right-hand menu. Next slide. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So I would like to introduce our moderator, John Richardson. John Richardson is the electrification consultant with NACFE and is going to be leading our discussion today. John.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending. We have an all-star cast for you today. I'd like to start off by talking about the 4 different disciplines we're going to cover today. We're going to cover site planning and assessments. That'll be handled by Suresh Jayanthi. He's the Senior Director of Sales and Business Development for Next Era Mobility. Following Suresh will be Hannah Jacobus. She's the Vice President of Real Estate and Development for Volterra Power. She'll be talking about utility engagement. Third, we have design and permitting, and we have Gregory Brenner. He's the Principal Managing Director at WB Engineers and Consultants. The final subject we'll tackle will be the actual construction of the station. And for that, we have Van Wilkins, Senior VP of Operations at In Charge Energy. So I want to thank you all for the time you've spent developing the content today. And we're thrilled to have the team. And I think at this point, Rachel, we're going to jump in and turn it over to Suresh to talk about site assessments.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
All right, wonderful. Good morning. Thank you so much for the opportunity here. Let me share some perspectives on the infrastructure projects that NextEra is undertaking. And before we jump into the details, I'll give a quick overview of what NextEra does, and then the solution model that we are bringing. And we'll focus on the critical elements of the site assessment. If you can go to the next slide, please. NextEra is one of the larger clean energy developers in the country, as a matter of fact, in the world. We produce more solar and wind and storage assets on an annual basis than most other platforms and organizations across. We spend quite a bit of time in terms of understanding the requirements of the customers from their clean energy needs, whether it is on-site, off-site, or the grid scale requirements. NextEra has been developing this solar projects over the last decade, and we have over 30 gigawatts in capacity, which is significantly higher capacity. The reason I emphasize this is this has been part of the journey we have taken to transition from clean energy space to the fleet electrification. So you can go to the next slide. Some of the lessons learned over the last decade executing on projects around clean energy have been used to develop a portfolio of solutions. Nextera brings essentially 4 different platforms to support fleets of different sizes. They provide an advisory function to help fleets plan their implementations across multiple sites across different segments. And the advisory platform we have put in place is help hundreds of thousands of vehicles in key markets create a roadmap over the next 5-10 years to go down this path of electrification. We have used some of the learnings from this to set up 3 different solution models. One for on-site infrastructure at the depots for customers and fleets who have duty cycles that demand that the infrastructure be on-site, and these are return to base operations. We also have developed a joint venture with Daimler and BlackRock Capital to create an infrastructure corridor across the nation to support the fleet electrification for medium and heavy-duty vehicles. And we are committing to deploy over $600 million to support this venture. And then thirdly, we also have a platform that is intended to serve medium-sized fleets or fleets who do not have access to infrastructure on their premises by creating what we call e-port.
Really quick, sorry to interrupt you. I'm having some issue with your audio, and it looks like our audience members are having some issue with your audio as well. Are you coming in on your phone?
I am. Any better now?
Yes, yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Okay. Apologies. Sorry about that. So I was just recapping some of the key portfolio solutions that Nextera brings to the table, from the advisory to the on-site infrastructure to customer-specific depots, and the highway corridor infrastructure that we've put in place along with our partner Daimler and BlackRock, and then a platform that we're developing to support medium-duty fleets who do not have infrastructure access to their own facilities, e-ports. Now, we would be delighted to think through and share some of the details of these different models with the broader audience, but let's jump right into the key elements that we would like to focus on as we look at sites and site assessment needs. Principally, there are around 3 key areas where we would want to put our attention. If we can go to the next slide. As customers are going down this journey, in order to make sure they have a holistic approach of infrastructure planning and site assessment, they need to look at 3 elements: the duty cycle, the workflow, as well as the stakeholder engagement. And the intent of all these 3 different elements is to drive towards one singular goal, which is to drive down the total cost of operations for these fleet operators as they transition from ICE vehicles to EVs and the infrastructure associated with that. So now let's focus a bit on the duty cycle. As we go through the exercise, if we can go to the next slide, as we go through the exercise of understanding the customer needs, it is important to right size as well as future-proof the infrastructure for the fleets. So spending a lot of time understanding the different vehicle configurations, what kind of EV infrastructure rating in terms of the charger power that is appropriate, and what kind of charger configurations would be intended to serve both medium and short-term duty cycles is going to be a critical component of a well-designed site plan. So we spend quite a bit of time helping customers think through these elements before we jump into the next step, which is the site planning. And if we can go to the next slide. And in here, there's a lot of emphasis put trying to understand the customer behavior, their use cases, the available power on site, what kind of utility interfaces do they have, what kind of vehicles will be coming, and when do they return to the base on a daily basis? Is there enough parking? And there is a series of questions we walk the customers through so they understand exactly what are the core elements that are needed to make sure the infrastructure that are they're intending to bring in is helping them build a platform that sustains their operations for today and going forward into the future. Concurrently, It will also help our customers and the fleet operators to understand what load profiles do they need to plan for their immediate needs as well as the needs going down the future. And there's a series of questions, and some of these can be gone into detail during the question and answer session, or we'd be happy to share this down the road. Another critical element is the vehicle to charger ratio, especially with space being a huge constraint, trying to understand what kind of infrastructure to vehicle combination and what kind of cycles can these chargers be put through to meet the appropriate requirements is a critical element. And that leads us to the third piece, which is the stakeholder engagement. If you can go to the next slide. We have spent quite a bit of time working with different fleet operators. And what has become clear is unless we have all the right stakeholders in place, from the facility manager to the site operations manager, the fleet operators, the drivers themselves, as well as the external stakeholders like the utility operators, it becomes extremely challenging to bring an infrastructure that serves the needs of the fleet in a holistic manner. So we have learned to bring these stakeholders right from the early planning stage, so they are part of the early design thinking, the implementation plan, as well as the post-implementation operations. So bringing these three critical principal elements together is a foundational requirement to have infrastructure that is well designed to meet the duty cycle needs for today and going down into the future. So if you can go to the last slide, it summarizes how we recommend from an infrastructure developer perspective, what are the three critical elements: the fleet specific site plan, the information around the site analysis, as well as a holistic engagement of the key stakeholders. These three elements will make sure we are not losing sight of what's important as we drive towards a transition to EVs. Okay. Let me pause here, and I'd be happy to answer questions towards the end. I'll pass it on to my colleague, Hannah, who will take the next set of slides. Thank you.
Thank you. Great information. All right, so I'm Hannah Jacobus with Volterra. I was raised in the data center space by way of corporate real estate. If we can go to the next slide. So Volterra was created to solve the many challenges associated with our carbon-free transportation future for fleets. We develop, own, and operate the infrastructure that enables customers to fully transition to the zero-emission vehicles at scale. Next slide. We're pretty active in all these segments that you see on the screen here. We've got properties under construction in these use cases in California, Arizona, Texas, Georgia, and Florida, with dozens in our pipeline at the moment. Next slide. So our solution is a true end-to-end solution. We acquire the site, permit and power the real estate. We design and construct the entire facility, deploy the charging hardware, and then we operate and maintain the facility. With a multi-billion-dollar equity commitment, deep experience deploying charging assets, and proven critical infrastructure expertise, we're forging our carbon-free transportation future. And we're pretty excited about the solution we're developing to do that. So next slide. I'm going to talk to you today about what information your utility needs from you, and a little bit about what they want you to know as you start planning your project and ultimately get it into construction. So I think as everyone knows or hears, you want to reach out to your utility at the earliest possible stage. But what does that really mean? A few examples. Are you touring property in the market? Are you just starting to think about where electrification could fit on your current site? or what a solution might be there. Reach out to contacts, understand just what the process is, who you should be working towards. Some utilities don't have a process set up for this early stage of planning. So a good place to start is the builder's call line or email, or with the utility business development group if you don't otherwise have a contact through people you're working with in the market. There's usually going to be multiple internal teams involved at the utility, and unfortunately, they don't always communicate with each other. So establishing who your point of contact is going to be, that single point of contact for your process, is going to be really helpful for you to navigate, and also give the utility a better understanding of what's going to happen during your project. So why do we want to engage at the early stage and kind of have that information sharing with the utility? Thought I would share just a few examples of things we have learned through project planning that may kind of pique your interest as far as things you want to avoid happening. So there might be pockets in the city that you're looking that are years, if not a decade out, having really power at scale that you need due to major upgrades needing to take place there. There might be a certain power load where that utility is going to push you to primary service. That's going to really have cost and procurement implications as you're planning and scheduling your project. Maybe that utility front load a lot of the construction costs onto the customer or the user versus others that are going to find a way to bill those back into your utility bills. So you're going to want to plan around that capital that's required. Maybe that particular utility is overloaded, understaffed. They might be months out from even being able to help you plan that project and review a new utility application. So you'd find that out as well through your initial conversations. They might have an extra multi-month, even a year process just to review designs. We've seen this in a few markets that we're active in today. And then there might be incentive programs that you want to find out about early, understand how you're going to qualify, what information you're going to need at certain stages. You know, those are prevalent in California today, needing to know information about number of vehicles, timing for vehicles, but we hope to see those continue to roll out, and understanding how you can qualify is, of course, something you're going to want to know about early on in the process. From there, from this kind of planning stage, you're going to move into what you hope is more of a formal feasibility study to get answers on cost, timeline, amount of power for your project. So feasibility studies can take many shapes. You know, that's kind of a fancy buzzword, but generally the utilities will need a little more information about what you're doing, the design of your site, the load you plan on connecting, and why. The utilities typically can't just, you know, pull up their database and tell you exactly how much power is available, but it becomes a conversation. They don't typically know off the shelf what's there. The answer is complicated. It involves layers of study throughout that area, what else is into, what the balance is of when you're going to need the power. This why of what you're doing is important because utilities are either going to size the demand off your connected load, or they're going to do their own internal diversification and load curve, which can create a discrepancy between what you want or need for your project and what the utilities think there is going to provide, which also impacts your cost and schedule at the end of the day. That's the theme of this information sharing back and forth that you'll continue to hear. I know this answer can be complicated. You know, a lot of us are learning on how and what to share with the utility to get the right information back. It's going to be based on, you know, of course, chargers that you have, the number of them, the charger output versus input, what you see the charging demand pattern looking like at your site throughout the day. It's important not to grossly overestimate because they can claw back power at certain points, but Of course, you don't want to underestimate and then not end up with enough power when you have all your vehicles showing up at one time. That's why the collaboration, I think, is really important. And then last, throughout this feasibility process, you're really going to have to drive forward all the parts of this engagement. Utilities just aren't staffed up to really handhold customers in this way to get you all the information that you need. At Volterra, we're managing these processes in dozens of utilities every day. We always involve local subject matter experts to help us with that. Next slide, please. So I'll just talk a short amount about the last two steps in the utility process, what other information you're going to have to come up with, and then share a couple lessons learned before I part today. So now it's time for you to submit your formal application. You're satisfied with the site, with the amount of power that you've been hearing, the cost and schedule. So the next step in that application, you're going to have to furnish some more detailed designs. You'll have a single line diagram that's needed, your site layout, and specifically where you're envisioning the electrical equipment being landed. And then you'll want to point out, as Suresh noted as well, that any on-site generation you might be thinking of or energy storage that's going to feed into what they design for your solution. You're going to need to share at that point the specifications of your equipment, the charger type, the load. You're going to need to share, the date you have to go in service, and then back up to when you're going to be ready to sign the contract and submit payment. And then last part of that application, and what will determine which application you fill out, is incentives. So needing to know those extra layers of details on the incentive piece as far as vehicles, dates, things like that. And then on the design and construction side, after this period of application review, you'll be kicked into a design period where you're assigned a designer or engineer. This person hopefully will become your new main point of contact throughout the more detailed engineering process and moving it into construction. So to close this part of the segment today, I'll just give you two kind of look out for as lessons learned as a part of this utility evolution. One piece is, once you get to that formal application, you will need to have land control. So whether you lease your site or you own your site or you are in the process of doing that through the earlier part of the utility information sharing, you have to have land control or owner sign off to apply. And then just being able to understand land rights kind of around your general site. The utility is going to design the site for maximum efficiency, capacity, lowest cost, how they get you the utility, but they're not going to look out for easements, encroachments, other kind of legal access rights that you might need to get, across from the utility line to your site. So that's going to be on you. You'll have to make sure that they will be able to get the equipment where it needs to go, and that they'll have land control where the utility is going to land their equipment. And then the last one is, be open to phased loading, phased capacity bringing in. If you're on the larger side of your site and power capacity, be open to kind of starting with a much smaller amount and working with the utility to find out, like, if we can't get 7 megawatts in a year, can we get 3 or 2, and then, maybe add an extra couple the next year, depending on where they're pulling from. That might at least bridge your gap a lot better than getting told no, if you give them a 7 megawatt tag and they're not able to solution that around the things that they have in the system. So that concludes kind of the information that you need from me at the utility and your project. And I'm going to pass it over to Greg for design and permitting.
Greg, sorry to interrupt. I think you're muted.
No.
Perfect. There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we got you now.
Okay, so good morning. I'm Greg Brenner. I'm a managing principal with WB Engineers Consultants, and we were founded in 1999. We have 200 team members, coast to coast, and our job as consulting engineers is really to simplify the complex and transform building infrastructure and environments to transform our clients' businesses. And we take a unique approach, and some of the things that we use in regards to our processes and our tools enable us to support clients at the very, very earliest point in an idea around a real estate or program need, and then helping drive that solution all the way through up to client occupancy. Next slide, please. So we are 12 offices coast to coast. We have worked in over 500 jurisdictions in supporting EV projects alone within the continental United States. Our team has supported a significant number of EV projects in both destination charging, in the fleet conversion, and new site development for large-scale EV hubs. Next slide, please. I drive a team under my technical advisory practice that is 30 EV engineers, program managers, project managers, utility coordinators, permit expediters, all driving solutions for our clients, again, from the very beginning up and through construction. We've worked with over 115 utility providers across the United States and have established very strong rapport with them that enable us to engage early and execute those upfront efforts that Hannah was speaking about very efficiently at the front end of our project. We've done over 4,000 charging stations throughout North America. That includes, again, continental United States and Canada. Next slide, please. And then, of course, we are working with not only direct end users on their fleet conversions, but working with OEMs, working with real estate developers, working with folks charging as a solution, and many utilities as well. Next slide, please. So now let's get right into it. I'm here to talk to you about both design considerations and permitting considerations. And there are a ton of things to consider when we talk about our design considerations. And what I'm driving at today are really the common elements, whether it be a greenfield site or an adapted use site or an existing depot that's going through a fleet conversion effort, and the impacts of the EV infrastructure that we need to consider through the design. First and foremost is the vehicle type and circulation, whether they're going to be buses, tractor trailers, delivery trucks, or personal vehicle and EV fleets of that sort. Taking into consideration the constraints around site as it relates to turning radiuses, drive aisle, and the like. When we think about coming into a site, we want to talk about access control and the requirements within the jurisdictions for queuing. If you are going to have access control, meaning gates that operate to let vehicles in and out, you need to take into consideration the queuing needs to get those vehicles off of the roadway and how many vehicles will have to be able to be queued at a time. Looking at our dispenser configurations, when we think about for fleet conversion and large-scale EV deployment, looking at a combination of level 2 chargers as well as level 3 chargers, whether those are going to be head of stall, island configurations, pull-through configurations, whether they're going to be level 3 chargers that are shared or dedicated, how the layout and dispenser configuration as it relates to the utility's ability to provide a certain deployment on number of services, and how that relates is all really important as we look at design considerations. Setback impacts will impact you no matter what you are doing in regards to what can be in that setback. Can chargers be accommodated in the setback? It varies by jurisdiction. Can the utility and distribution equipment be in that setback? What are the things and the limitations in regards to our equipment layouts that are going to impact that design consideration? Looking at that infrastructure layout, the utility point of connection, trying to minimize your primary runs and offset that secondary run is critical. Looking at existing landscaping as it relates to trees that jurisdictions are saying, no, we need to keep that tree. You'd be surprised more than not how often we run across that. And then looking at overall shading and landscaping as it relates to screening requirements for the jurisdictions. Considering again those charging stall size and handicap stall requirements based on the type of EV depot that you are challenged with or trying to develop varies based on jurisdiction. And taking into consideration heat island effects. So heat island effects in urban areas, and we are all suffering through a very, very challenging summer. There are many jurisdictions that are requiring us now to provide shading of a percentage of the site, look at ways to offset that heat island effect, whether it's with a solar shade, whether it's just with a shade canopy, or even looking at surface coatings that are now being developed and designed to reduce overall heat island effects. And then looking at your perimeter security and screening requirements that are going to meet the needs and challenges associated with your particular site. And so those are just some of the design considerations that everybody needs to take into effect as you get started out through that design journey. Next slide, please. So when we talk about permitting, I like to think of it as a bit of a tug of war, but at the end of the day, we're trying to create a win-win for both the EVCS operators or our site users and the jurisdiction. There is a myriad of items that need to be considered on both sides of this tug of war. And I can tell you this, that not every site is going to be the same. Not every jurisdiction is going to be the same. And because you've had great success in Nashville, Tennessee, doesn't mean you're going to have great success in Houston, Texas. Again, with all the jurisdictions that we've worked within, one of the biggest challenges is zoning and understanding those zoning regulations, the entitlements at the front end of these projects, recognizing that you're going to have potentially multiple submissions, whether they be site development submissions, architectural review board submissions, landscape submissions, building permit submissions, even EV design submissions. At the front end of these is something that you want to make sure that your consultants are ready to address and submit on. When you think about the things that you can do as an operator and developer, early concept design plans and site renderings are crucial in helping folks understand, because this is very new overall, of what these sites will look at and what the net impact is really, really important. And we strive and stress education, education, education on the site use and impacts, special accommodations that you're willing to give, and then source the system components and overall safety. Next slide, please. And so lessons learned is really act. Don't wait, be proactive, start early, do your best to stay ahead. Early engagement with your design professional, with the authority having jurisdiction is crucial. Recognize the greenfield sites, meaning new developed sites, versus existing adaptive reuse sites. Very differ greatly and have similar but different challenges. So understanding what the impacts of those two types of site developments are is crucial. Project timeline contingencies are imperative outside of just cost contingency. Again, no two jurisdictions are alike. Zoning regulations have not been considered holistically for EV. And so education, 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 have patience and work to win-win solutions is the best advice that I can give you after working in this market in the DC fast charging since 2017. And then I will hand this presentation over to Van.
Van, it looks like you are muted on our end.
There we go. So you got your utility engaged, you got your permit going. Now it comes time to do some construction. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide here. For time, I'm speeding up a little bit. So before you physically dig in the ground, sometime between when you've done your permit application and before you get your notice to proceed from the authority having jurisdiction, you want to have an on-site kickoff with the construction and design teams and the operations people for the site. Because there's things that maybe they didn't think about when they were doing the design or bidding the job. Now you want to get down to the nitty gritty. You want to lay out the site, take a look at where the traffic is, think about all these excess vehicles that are going to be on the site, whether it's putting in one charger or 20, you have the same operational impacts. Think about where deliveries are coming in at, where are you going to store things, where are you going to put your waste disposal, trash cans, where are you going to have porta-johns. What about when you dig out of the ground that spoiled dirt, where are you going to put it? What about when it rains? You'll see one picture there. We had a customer with a very large site, putting in 20 chargers, unexpectedly get rain in Southern California. Now the entire schedule's messed up. You got to think about how does this impact our little 2-week window we had to interrupt operations? How are we going to pump this water out? Where is it going to go? So you have to think about those weather interruptions. And then you also have, what about when the inspector interrupts your project because they didn't like something they were doing? Yes, the plan reviewers accepted it, but Ranger Rick is out on your site and he's like, I don't like that, and he stops you. Think about your contingency plans what about we got to get emergency access vehicles in? What if we do have a problem with part of the construction? So you have to think about contingencies for power outages, weather, and other things that are going to happen. One of the most important points, though, is making sure any day that there's construction happening on your site, somebody that represents your interests is there watching what's happening, whether it's your general contractor, whether it's your engineer, your architect, or whether it's somebody from your company. You want to be on site whenever there's construction happening. And this gives you a feel for just some pictures you see at the bottom corner there. When people have to block off lanes, what does that mean to the operations at the site? All of a sudden, they've got a whole lane that they can't drive trucks or buses or vehicles through. Next slide. So this pre-planning, one of the things that's very helpful, physically go out to the site and have your construction teams, even if it's just putting cones, mark out where you're going to trench, where you're going to have laydown areas, spray marking. Think about turn radiuses for trucks coming in and out or buses coming in and out. Think about what's going to be impacted. This is where the three-dimensional planning that doesn't always get done ahead of time. So take, for instance, the bottom corner there. Nobody really thought about what it meant to trench 300 foot across somebody's parking lot because the electrical contractor bid the shortest route diagonally across the lot. Now it's a mess. The person's operation is interrupted, then it rains, and now 1 week turns into 3 weeks. The electrical inspector is not happy about the way it was put in, so now somebody's site's disrupted for months. So when you mark out what's going to happen, now you can make changes before somebody interrupts the business, before big costs are incurred. You may come back and say, you know what, we need to pay a little bit differently and bore this instead of doing a trench. So you have to think about physically where the construction is going to happen. The top right corner there, clean dirt can hide issues. There might be large granite chunks, there might be old concrete, and what everybody thought was a nice clean trench Now all of a sudden you got to get out a ram hoe, you got to get out dynamite, you have to do other things to get past an obstruction. So now you have to think about the other equipment you have to get out when you find something in the dirt that nobody planned on. So let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide. So we think about civil work. Let's take even a small site. This involves demolition of hard surfaces, whether it be concrete or pavement. You have to cut it. And so before that, the site has to be marked by a Miss Utility or the utilities in your area to make sure where you're going to trench or dig, you don't have an obstruction. Sometimes they're going to have to hand dig or cut. So when you dig up this area, you kind of see some things happening. In the top right corner, you see there's spoils. And this is basically the pavement, dirt, rocks, trash, garbage that we cut. And now I've got a pile of it I have to do something with. I have to make room for it. Then once you've gotten this dug up and cleaned out, before you let the contractor backfill, before he pours concrete, you want to make sure somebody's validating that whatever template that the manufacturer has fits over where the conduits are at, that the charger or the switchgear transformer is oriented the proper direction, because this is your last chance to catch it before it gets messy to fix it later. Verify the rebar sizing that's in there because it's on the drawings. So this part of it is so critical because quite often, maybe somebody has the charger turned 90 degrees and now the cable won't reach the way it was designed. Or they planned on one type of charger and then the charger type changed. Now the conduit's in the wrong spot relative to the size of the base. So this validation before you pour concrete is very critical because sometimes it gets moved a little bit one way or the other. Now you can't open a door on a charger, so you can't service it, can't start it up, and it just creates a lot of friction unnecessarily at the end of the project. And then you get we'll say the make ready done. So you said, great, we can pour the concrete, conduits up, things are capped off. Now you can pour it and get the make ready done where they're pulling the wire. So let's go to the next slide. So let's think about the utility feed. So if you're at a facility that has enough power for your 2 or 3 chargers, great. If you're in a green field where you got to start out of the ground, you have to think physically about getting from the utility connection to your transformer to your switchgear. This part gets fuzzy in some jurisdictions. You have to make sure it's clear who's handling what part of it, because you have the path physically of conduit from the pole or from the big green utility box somewhere out along the street. You have that medium voltage conduit and wiring that has to get from there to wherever your transformer is going to go. And that usually is a much deeper trench than what you might have out on your lot. And also the conduits have to be backfilled with concrete. They've got a slurry. There's more actions that have to happen here. And this a lot of times is out of your control because once the utility is involved, they have their own subcontractors. And they are very layered, bureaucratic type of organization. So you have a line crew, they have a subcontracted crew that does some of the civil work or the poles. You got one crew that terminates the wires on the transformer on the pole or in the switch cabinet. Then you've got the transformer rigging crew that's going to come out and drop the transformer in place. But the most important guy is the metering tech. His word is the final say. If he doesn't turn your site on, nobody will go past him. So you have all these people that are out of control, timing and schedule-wise, that go on their own path. And it's very important that whoever's doing your electrical and your civil work, that they have a clear line of demarcation of what part are we doing here at this site, because it could change from location to location. So you never want to assume that whatever you did at the last site is going to be the same that the utility will do for this site. Next slide. When you're doing your trenching, you have to think about the depth and width. Caution tape's not an effective traffic control. Make sure you have some way to keep people and vehicles from crossing into the area. You'll see in the top corner of the picture, there's a steel plate. You want to have those there so when there's unexpected things happening, you have a way to slide it over the trench, drive forklifts or heavy vehicles across. Dust control, shoring plan if you go deep. Here's a good example of finding things you weren't expecting. This location, they hit a gas line, but they thought it was a fiber optic line because One time it was orange, next time it was yellow, there was a change, and then it created a lot of chaos on the site. So then they had to go deeper, more depth, shoring, more concrete, more wire, everything. The bottom one is where they found the medium voltage cables were only about 12 inches below the surface. They weren't where everybody expected them. Very fortunate, the guys hand dug it, so they didn't hit them. But these types of things show us that utility location is not an exact science. You have to be prepared and make sure people don't take shortcuts or they'll really mess up your plan. Next slide. So the final install, energize, so pulling in the wire, make sure somebody's there. You want to make sure you get reports back on insulation resistance testing, or you may hear it called megger testing, because wire is easily damaged. You want to prove that the insulation is good before it's turned on. Make sure they seal the ends. And by all means, when they're unloading heavy equipment, switchgear, chargers, make sure somebody's there. Because you can see the bottom right-hand corner, a guy picks it up, it swings, damages the face of it before you ever even get to use it. And then it's a big mess. You get electrical acceptance testing, arc flash labeling so people know what level the safety gear they need before they turn it on. You get your green tag from the local inspector, you energize the switchgear, and now you're ready for startup. Let's go to the next slide. Let's talk about probably the most important part of the entire project. That's commissioning. With passenger vehicles, commissioning is an easy deal. High volume production vehicles, not many kinks to work out. But for heavy vehicles, a lot of these are new and they're in the less than, several thousands or hundreds or sometimes less than that have been made. Still some kinks to work out, firmware to be updated on the charger, vehicle side. So you want to make sure that you get data when you commission those vehicles. Maybe have a high production passenger vehicle out there with the same battery voltage. So like if you got a Volvo VNR, maybe have an Ioniq 5 because they both have that 800 volt class architecture. And that way you got a control for your test. This is kind of like commissioning a HVAC system on a large commercial building where they go around air balancing. You want to make sure the controls work the way they're supposed to. You want to make sure you got jumper cables, 12 volt batteries die all the time. You want to have a rep from the OEM for the vehicle there or his dealer. And you want to have somebody from the charger manufacturer. Somebody has access to the back end of the charger so you can troubleshoot those issues and make sure it's going to work the way it's supposed to. Go to the next slide. Some of the things you're looking for during this commissioning is if you're doing any kind of delayed starting, load management, power limiting, trying to wake the vehicle up, you want to test that during commissioning and make sure that the charger and the vehicle work the way you had planned it to work. You're looking at the charging curves, voltage, current, kW, making sure that the way the site was designed and the vehicles are going to work as planned. This is so critical. This is where most projects fall apart. Anybody can build a site. The commissioning is where you get your real money and your effort out of all this project, or you find out we've had numerous customers that have had to change out their chargers after the whole site was built because the vehicles and the chargers didn't work well together. It didn't work as planned. So the commissioning is where you make sure and validate everything that was done. And so now we've shoved what can be 90 days to 18 months of construction into 10 minutes. That's the last slide. We got the checkout. This is just all your paperwork. Make sure you get the keys. Documentation is important. So I apologize for going quickly, but I was just trying to be respectful of the time there.
Not a problem. John, it looks like you are muted, and we'll go ahead and get started with Q&A. If we could have the speakers, all of our speakers come back.
Okay, so one of the first comments I see here from the audience is with long lead time items, particularly switchgear, because switchgear is so important because the utility can't complete their work until the switchgear has been installed and inspected. So what can we do to minimize those impacts, either with switchgear or charging hardware? and I'll open it up to anybody.
Since I work for a switchgear manufacturer, ABB is majority owner, I can maybe address this. There are all the manufacturers of hardware of switchgear have quick ship programs, but you're going to pay 1.5 to sometimes 3 times the value of the gear. There's stuff in the aftermarket that you can get, but it takes flexibility in your engineering and design spec, and you're going to have to pay for it. But you can get stuff quicker, but you have to have flexibility in design, and you're going to pay more. That's usually about the only way you can tackle it.
Yeah, John, the other thing that I would add to that is, very, very early on in the project, in order to have that initial engagement with the utility, we know at the concept level how many chargers we're able to get on site based on concept planning around number of stalls. And once we can level set with our end user on the charger and the size charger that they're looking to do, we can easily size up our switch gear and start to make early selections around ability to get early procurement efforts out of the way for that. And that's how we've been helping our clients through that challenge.
Just to add to that, the best laid plans always induce delays, whether it is the supply chain or the utility interface delays stuff, or changes on site that are going to induce additional delays that were unforeseen, not even related to EV infrastructure. So looking at a phased approach and also making sure if there is a way to create ad hoc charging as vehicles are coming, whether infrastructure is ready or not in some cases. So having the ability to get power, at least on a limited basis, is one of the shorter term solutions that our customers are addressing.
Thank you. Okay, next question. One thing we haven't really talked about is charging standards. I've not heard mention megawatt charging. Is that something that is planned for upfront or addressed later?
Upfront. If that is a requirement based on the duty cycle, we do want to factor that in the early design phase. It's going to be a lot more challenging to revisit that whole infrastructure plan later down the road.
Okay. Next question is, how will roadway truck stops be able to comply with this new infrastructure direction? How about using highway rest areas? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so John, we're supporting efforts in both, whether it be with the state of Florida and other jurisdictions, or folks like Pilot Flying J, in really just bringing additional utility resource to those locations. Being on the highway, it's not as easy and certainly not inexpensive, but the infrastructure that the utilities are able to provide us in certain sites is no different than developing it in an urban area. It comes with planning and coordination very early on with the utility. One of the things we're also looking at in regards to some of the needs around resiliency is how to provide standby generation or on-site battery storage capabilities to deal with emergency evacuation solutions for certain parts of the country.
Good, good. The next question I'm looking at here is, given the cost of real estate in general, what are the low footprint charging infrastructure options, such as overhead structures for charge port dispensing? So I guess the question is overhead versus underground.
Yeah. And
I think,
go ahead, Suresh.
Sorry, Greg. I think the critical driving factor has to be the operational workflow. There are reasons why overhead charging is more applicable, as you cannot have these charging assets interfering with vehicle movement, especially in logistics operations. So that would be the primary driver in terms of a design strategy. Should they be pedestal or overhead? Real estate is definitely a consideration, So ganging up these charges to provide one-to-many kind of ratios from charger to vehicle, so oversize the charging power rating appropriately enough to meet the duty cycle so you can turn the vehicles in a short period of time is going to be a critical driver, not just whether or not to place them on the ground or overhead. Go ahead.
And the other thing, John, I think we look at is, the type of facility that's going into, right? When you're looking at garage facilities, there are other options to consider. We have found that in large part with greenfield installations, there's not a significant cost delta between overhead or underground. What it really comes down to is planning things out effectively. We're looking at an adaptive reuse, looking at the phasing and the impact again on the operation of the site. There are usually effective ways to work around that in construction if you're going below grade. And I would say that in large part, we look at overhead distribution as a last resort.
And I think, John, when you think about some of the questions people had is really about overhead chargers. And it's really about the vehicle and where the port is and the practicality of the overhead cable coming down, getting to whatever structure you do. So we've seen a mix of those on heavy trucks where they're all backing up to a dock where you have a superstructure over, drop cable down. There's no perfect way because then you have to deal with a retractor up and down now. So it just creates a new maintenance issue. So it's really about what has the most cost impact on the site, whether you do an overhead charger or a ground-based charger. You don't really want to do anything below grade because water is always going to be a problem for charging equipment. People have tried it. It doesn't work well in airports.
Although there are new technologies that are out there now, Van, that we're supporting with inductive charging, which is all below grade. And I think the future will see more and more inductive charging, especially with certain fleet configurations.
Yeah, especially once all the vehicle manufacturers get on board with it, then it opens up new possibilities.
Good. So I'm going to jump into the next question here. This question is directed to Van, but Greg might be a good resource for this as well. The question is, have you considered using precast concrete to avoid backfilling with concrete?
We did that for a integrated battery system we did for one of the luxury OEMs over a 3-year period where we built a precast base, excavated and put it in. Precast can work well. There's a lot of precast systems, both for cabling that you can do for like trench duct that we use on large industrial sites. So there's a couple of different ways to tackle it, but it's usually to Greg and his point, it's about planning out the location and where you're going to source the precast from and the site prep. If you don't get the ground graded properly, you have the same issue with precast as you do with anything else.
Yeah, and John, we're certainly driving toward as much prefab as we can, which is where I think this question is really looking at how much can we do off-site to prefab the infrastructure, and we're having some significant success around prefab skids with all the EV infrastructure deployed, and then of course prefabbing all of our duct banks and the like.
Good. Next question. Is there an initiative to partner with industrial developers to install charging stations within new industrial parks?
So I don't want to interrupt,
Absolutely.
but we are at about time, so this will be our last question.
Okay.
Yeah, on that point, John, there is a lot of interest in having industrial parks or these warehousing zones be hubs for infrastructure. So individual facility operators or fleet operators do not necessarily have to build their own infrastructure. We are pioneering quite a few of those across Southern California, Northern California, and one in the East Coast, where bringing real estate control under one person or one entity, and then building out the infrastructure to serve multiple fleets operating within the vicinity of a warehouse region is quite attractive because it removes the capital budgeting challenges a lot of these fleets are facing, and also removes all the headaches associated with infrastructure development. So I believe that could be one of the accelerators for fleet electrification.
Okay, great. I want to thank you all, Van, Hannah, Suresh, and Greg, for taking the time and being a part of the presentation today. Rachel?
Thank you so much, John, and I echo John's sentiments. Thank you guys so much for your time and expertise today, especially wrapping up our final boot camp session. It's great to have you guys on. It's a great conversation. Thank you again to our audience for being so engaged. We got so many great questions. And that wraps our final boot camp session. So this is just a reminder to go back to the landing page of this session on runonless.com to take the quiz. It is now available. And be sure to connect with us on social media as well. If we could go to the final slide, that is going to have all of our social media handles linked out. And we appreciate the time that you've spent with us this summer learning about all things depot electrification. We will see you in the next run. Have a great rest of your summer and have a fabulous day. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.